Welcome back, you night owls. Tonight we're taking a deep, quiet dive into a story that was, for a long time, nothing more than a whisper behind palace walls. It's a tale so potent, so utterly reckless, that it changed the course of one of the world's greatest empires. We're talking about a love affair, but not the kind you see in romantic movies. This was a secret, high-stakes game of hearts and power, played out in the claustrophobic opulence of the Qing dynasty's Forbidden City. This isn't just a bedtime story, it's a historical slow burn with a twist. The stakes were so high, you probably wouldn't survive the first week if you were dropped into the middle of it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where in the world you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing on the other side of time, in the cold, crisp air of the 18th century Beijing. The Forbidden City looms before you, a labyrinth of crimson walls and golden roofs. It's late afternoon, and the light is slanting low, turning the dust motes in the air into glittering gold. The air itself feels heavy, thick with the scent of incense, the silence of stone courtyards, and the weight of tradition. You're a silent observer, a ghost gliding past servants who scurry with their heads bowed, past eunuchs whose faces are masks of practiced indifference. This is the court of the Qianlong Emperor, a man at the height of his power. He rules over a vast, prosperous empire that stretches from the snows of Siberia to the jungles of Southeast Asia. He is the son of heaven, a poet, a warrior, and an insatiable collector of art. But tonight he is just a man, feeling a flicker of something new in the predictable rhythm of his life. His palace, the hall of mental cultivation, is a place of immense power and solitude. It's here that you find him, not poring over state documents, but watching a young woman perform. You've heard her name whispered, the fragrant concubine, Rongfei. But that's a later title. For now she is just a new arrival, a gift from a distant, newly pacified territory in the far west. Her presence here is a political statement, a bond forged in marriage to unite the disparate parts of the empire. You know that for a fact. It was a common practice among emperors to marry women from various ethnic groups to consolidate power. This was a strategic move, not an act of affection. She is dressed in her native Uyghur clothing, her hair arranged in a style that is utterly foreign to the court. As she dances, a delicate silver bell tied to her wrist tinkles softly. Her movements are graceful, almost fluid, and as she turns, the light catches the intricate embroidery of her robe. It's not the grand, formal dance of the Manchu court, but something looser, more expressive. You can't help but feel a little transfixed yourself, and so is the emperor. He's seated on his throne, but he's leaning forward, his usual impassive demeanour replaced by a look of genuine curiosity. He's seen 1,000 dances, but never one like this. This is the mainstream historical fact. The Qianlong Emperor's court was vast and filled with women from all over the empire, but his fascination with Rongfei was unique and widely documented. But here's a quirkier bit that historians still argue about. The nickname Fragrant Concubine wasn't just a poetic flourish. According to some stories, she was said to have a natural sweet scent that clung to her, a perfume that came from her body and wasn't applied from a bottle. It was a detail so unusual it was recorded in some of the more informal palace records. Historians still argue whether this was a real biological phenomenon or a romanticised myth created to explain the emperor's intense affection for her. Either way, it's a detail that adds a dash of mystery to her. Did her uniqueness draw him in, or was he already enchanted, and the story of her fragrance simply a way to rationalise his feelings? You see him rise from his throne, a subtle signal for the dance to end. The other concubines in the room, their faces carefully schooled, exchange quick, almost imperceptible glances. They know. They can feel the shift in the air. The emperor, a man who has always been a remote figure to them, is suddenly very, very present. His gaze is fixed on Rongfei, and he offers a small, genuine smile. This is not supposed to happen. The emperor's wives and concubines were ranked in a strict hierarchy. His true love was supposed to be his empress, a woman chosen for her impeccable Manchu lineage, not a barbarian princess. This was a political arrangement, a duty to the state, and any personal feelings were meant to be secondary. But the way he looks at her, The way he leans in to ask her a question, ignoring the others, it's a violation of every unspoken rule in the palace. It's like a tiny crack has formed in the perfect polished facade of the empire. He asks her a question in her native tongue. You don't understand the words, but you see her eyes widen slightly, a flicker of surprise followed by a soft, beautiful smile. Her reply is quiet, respectful, and yet there is an ease between them that you've never seen with the other women. This isn't a courtship, it's a connection, immediate and profound, forged in the most unlikely of places. He's found in her a kindred spirit, a curiosity that matches his own, a woman who is not a product of the rigid Manchu court, but a wild, exotic flower blooming in the heart of the forbidden city. The other concubines watch, their smiles now brittle. One of them, a high-ranking lady, turns her face away, her jaw tight. She knows this is the beginning of something, and she also knows that whatever this is, it will not end well for her, or for the delicate balance of power in the court. The Emperor has found his new obsession, and his love will prove to be as dangerous as his wrath. You feel a chill run down your spine. This is the moment. The seemingly harmless exchange of words between a powerful emperor and a beautiful concubine. But this is the moment when a secret affair ignites, a slow burning fire that will spread through the forbidden city, consuming reputations, lives, and ultimately changing the very fate of an empire. And you, my friend, are now a part of it, a silent witness to a historical love story unlike any other. The air in the forbidden city, which felt so heavy before, now feels charged with a different kind of energy. It's an energy of secrets, of something new and electric growing in the shadows. You've been here for a short time, but you're beginning to understand the unspoken rules, the delicate balance of power that dictates every breath. The Emperor's fascination with Rongfei is no longer a fleeting fancy. It's becoming a gravitational pull, and you, a silent observer, are about to be pulled into its orbit. You're smuggled into the heart of the palace, not by force, but by the subtle currents of the court itself. You find yourself in the Hall of Earthly Tranquility, the main residence of the Empress. But even here, in the very seat of power for the imperial harem, the whispers have begun. They move like a cold draught under the ornate doors, carried on the soft rustle of silk robes. You listen, perched behind a towering screen carved from black lacquer, as the Empress's chief lady-in-waiting relays the latest court gossip. Her voice is low but sharp, a knife cloaked in honeyed words. She eats her meals alone, the lady says, referring to Rongfei, in a separate pavilion. His Majesty has commanded it. This is a significant detail. The lower-ranking concubines usually ate together in a common dining hall, a show of their collective subservience, but the Emperor's command has already set her apart. It's a subtle but clear signal that she is no longer just another concubine. She is someone special. The Empress, who's been listening in stony silence, simply nods. Her eyes are like chips of ice. You know, a little nugget of mainstream history here, that the Qianlong Emperor was a stickler for tradition. He rarely, if ever, broke with the rigid protocols of the court. His public favouritism of a woman from a different ethnic group was a truly unprecedented move. It was the historical equivalent of a monarch suddenly abandoning all royal duties to become a vlogger. It just didn't happen. And yet, here it is, happening right before your eyes. His obsession isn't just about her beauty. You see this in the private moments you're now privy to. He's learning her language, a feat that would be unthinkable for a man of his stature. He brings her gifts not of jade or silk, but of things that remind her of the home, a small pouch of fragrant spices from the west, a rare kind of horse from her native land. These are not grand gestures for public show, they are small, personal acts of affection. It's the kind of thing that makes you feel a little warm inside, a little fluttery, even though you know this is all going to end in tears. Now for a quirky tidbit. You remember that story about her being naturally fragrant? Well, the Emperor, in a moment of whimsical affection, reportedly commissioned a special garden for her. It was a replica of a landscape from her homeland, filled with plants and trees native to her region. The purpose, according to some whispers, was to create an environment where her natural fragrance would be enhanced. A bit of a romantic, isn't he? Or maybe just a bit of an eccentric. It's hard to tell with these historical figures, they're like complicated memes from a bygone era. You follow the Emperor to the Hall of Mental Cultivation, his private sanctuary. He's with his senior advisors, but his mind is clearly elsewhere. He's sketching on a small pad of paper a quick, effortless drawing of a woman in a traditional Uyghur headdress. The advisors, men who hold the fate of millions in their hands, stand silent, pretending not to see. It's a moment of profound intimacy, a window into a powerful man's heart. It's a vulnerability he would never show in public, a secret you have been given the privilege to see. This brings us to a scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether the emperor's affection for Rongfei was a genuine, deep love, or if it was a political maneuver to keep her people loyal. On one hand, you have the personal gifts and private moments of affection that seem to point to genuine emotion. On the other hand, an emperor's every action is a political statement. Was he simply a master politician, using his love as a tool to pacify a distant, restive region? The answer, like so many things, is probably somewhere in the murky middle. It can be both, can't it? A man can be in love while also being a ruthless pragmatist. It's one of those beautiful contradictions that make history so much fun to untangle. The danger of this secret is not just for the emperor. You, as a witness, feel the tension building. The other concubines are not stupid. They see what you see. They have spent their entire lives vying for the emperor's attention. And now a newcomer, a foreigner no less, is effortlessly winning the prize they have all so desperately coveted. Their smiles are strained. Their politeness is a thin veil over simmering resentment. You can practically feel the daggers they're throwing with their eyes. A particularly high-ranking concubine, Consort Ling, is the most visibly agitated. She had been the emperor's favourite for years, and now her position is in jeopardy. She holds a powerful place in the court, and she has her own family to think of, her own son to position for the succession. This new rival threatens everything. You see her talking to a eunuch in a remote courtyard, her face a mask of furious calculation. The eunuch nods, his face impassive, but you can see the avarice in his eyes. The palace is not just a home. It's a living, breathing ecosystem of power and influence, and the empress is at the very top of the food chain. She may be silent now, but you can feel her presence, her watchful eyes, even when she's not in the room. The secret is out in a way. It's a truth everyone knows, but no one dares to speak aloud. And a truth unspoken is the most dangerous kind of truth. It allows for plots to be hatched in the dark, for whispers to turn into daggers. You watch as Rongfei, still seemingly oblivious to the storm she's brewing, walks in the palace gardens. She is beautiful, yes, but more than that, she is a woman in a world of protocol and artifice, a woman who is simply herself. She laughs, a sound that rings with an almost shocking clarity in the hushed courtyards. And the emperor hears it, and he smiles. And in that smile, in that unguarded moment of happiness, you see the true depth of the secret. It's not just a passing fancy, it's a love, and it's a love that will prove to be the most dangerous thing in all the Forbidden City. The secret is out, but it's not a shout. It's a slow, creeping vine of suspicion coiling itself around the heart of the palace. You are a silent witness to its growth, feeling the change in the atmosphere as keenly as a shift in the weather. The air, once thick with the scent of incense and political ambition, now carries the faint, sour tang of jealousy and paranoia. And at the centre of this storm, standing like a monolith of quiet fury, is the Empress herself. Her name is Sheoxian, a woman of impeccable Manchu lineage, chosen not for love but for duty. She is the epitome of imperial decorum. Her life is a tapestry woven from intricate rituals, ancient traditions, and the unyielding expectations of her position. For years she has been the very foundation of the Emperor's court, the unshakable rock upon which the entire family structure rests. You know this to be true. A core tenet of Qing dynasty rule was the centrality of the Empress as a symbol of dynastic stability and continuity. Her role was less about affection, and more about embodying the perfect, virtuous matriarch. You see her in her private chambers, her face a serene mask. She's seated at a low table, performing the precise, meditative art of calligraphy. But her hand is not as steady as it should be. The ink blurs at the edges of the character, a tiny, almost imperceptible flaw. It's a sign that the perfect facade is starting to crack. Her chief lady-in-waiting, the same one from before, enters and bows low. The Empress doesn't look up, but her voice is as sharp as a newly honed blade. "She has been granted the Winter Palace," the lady says, her words tumbling out in a rush. A separate courtyard, and a retinue of eunuchs from the imperial guard. The pen in the Empress's hand stops. The Winter Palace is not a common residence. It is a place of solitude and reflection, an honour reserved for only the highest-ranking consorts. This is a massive visible step up for Rongfei, an elevation that breaks with every established protocol. The Emperor is no longer being discreet. He is flaunting his preference, not just to the court, but to the entire world within the palace walls. Now, for a quirky tidbit, according to some of the more detailed and likely embellished court records, the Empress had a particular affection for a rare breed of white-feathered pigeons. She kept a whole flock of them in a secluded aviary. It was said that she would whisper her troubles to them, believing they would carry her burdens away on their wings. On the day she learns of Rongfei's new residence, you see her walk to the aviary, her face grim. She doesn't whisper. She simply watches the pigeons, her hands clasped tightly behind her back, the very picture of contained rage. It's a small, personal detail that humanises this powerful woman and shows you the depth of her frustration. This brings us to a crucial scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether the Empress's reaction was born purely of personal jealousy, or if it was a calculated response to a political threat. The Emperor's fascination with Rongfei was not just a romantic indiscretion, it was a potential instability for the entire dynasty. By elevating a woman from a non-Manchu tribe, he risked alienating powerful Manchu clans and arousing suspicion among his own people. Was the Empress's anger fueled by a broken heart, or was it the cool, rational fear of a ruler who sees a crack forming in the foundation of her empire? Perhaps it was a mixture of both, a potent cocktail of personal humiliation and political foresight. She was, after all, a woman raised to put the stability of the state above all else. You follow her gaze as she walks through the palace, not to confront the Emperor, but to observe. She sends out her own spies, not men with daggers, but quiet, observant eunuchs, and ladies who are loyal to her alone. They report on every movement, every gift, every private moment shared between the Emperor and Rongfei. You see one of her spies hiding in the bushes near the Winter Palace, dressed as a gardener, his head bowed, but his eyes darting toward the courtyard. The Empress is building a case, a dossier of indiscretions. She's not reacting with a hot, emotional rage. She's acting with the cold precision of a general. She summons Consort Ling, the very same concubine you saw before, the one whose power was also threatened. Consort Ling enters the chamber, her face a study in respectful humility, but you can see the cunning behind her eyes. The two women, so different in rank and temperament, are now united by a common enemy. The Empress doesn't speak openly about Rongfei. She talks about the need to preserve dynastic harmony and the importance of tradition. Consort Ling nods, her agreement a silent pact. You know this is the beginning of a quiet conspiracy, a network of whispers and alliances forming in the dark corners of the palace. The Empress's growing suspicion isn't just a personal matter, it's affecting the very rhythm of the court. The atmosphere is tense. Courtiers walk on eggshells, unsure of who to align with. The Emperor's senior advisors, who once treated him with unshakable deference, now seem a little more hesitant, a little more guarded. They see the writing on the wall. This affair is no longer just a private matter, it's a political liability, it's a risk, and the Empress, the keeper of tradition, is the first to see it for what it is. One evening, you're a fly on the wall in the Hall of Mental Cultivation. The Emperor is working late, but he's distracted. He signs a decree with a flourish, then immediately frowns and orders it rewritten, the stroke of his brush too light, too hesitant. The official in charge of the documents, a venerable scholar with a long flowing beard, pretends not to notice. But you do. You see the Emperor's mind is 1,000 miles away, in a courtyard where a certain fragrant concubine is probably preparing for bed. The Empress sends him a gift, a meticulously crafted scroll painting of the imperial family tree with every name and every title rendered in perfect detail. It's a subtle but powerful reminder of his duty, of the dynastic legacy he has sworn to protect. The Emperor unrolls it, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. He knows what she is doing. It's not an act of love. It's a strategic maneuver, a quiet, devastating checkmate on the board of their lives. You see the weight of his duty settle on his shoulders. He loves this woman, this strange exotic concubine, but he also loves his empire. The Empress knows this. She's not just fighting for his heart, she's fighting for the soul of the dynasty. And she's using every tool at her disposal, from her trusted spies to her subtle, cutting gifts to bring him back to his senses. The stage is set for a confrontation, not with swords and battle cries, but with polite smiles and hidden daggers. You feel a sense of dread. The silence in the Forbidden City is becoming more and more deafening, and it's only a matter of time before it all explodes. The silence in the Forbidden City is a deceptive thing. It's not an absence of sound, but a cloak for 1,000 tiny noises, the rustle of silk, the soft padding of slippered feet, the low murmur of voices that never quite reach a whisper. Now, thanks to the Empress's growing suspicions and the Emperor's bold favouritism, that murmur has become a buzzing, a constant hum of speculation and intrigue. You feel it in the very air, a static charge that makes the back of your neck prickle. The whispers have begun, and they are like tiny, venomous insects flitting from courtyard to courtyard. The heart of this gossip network is the palace staff, specifically the eunuchs and the ladies-in-waiting. These are the people who see everything but are meant to speak of nothing. They live in a world of rigid protocol where a misplaced word can mean a beating, or worse. But underneath this strict exterior, they are the ears and eyes of the palace. They know who sleeps where, who receives what gifts, and who is falling out of favour. A mainstream historical fact is that eunuchs, in particular, were not just servants, but were often powerful political players in their own right, managing the daily lives of the royals and serving as crucial conduits of information, both sanctioned and illicit. You find yourself in a secluded corner of the imperial garden, a place meant for quiet contemplation, but tonight it's an impromptu town hall for the palace staff. Two ladies in waiting, their faces partially obscured by their elaborate headdresses, are talking in low, urgent tones. They are discussing Rongfei. One of them, a woman named Li, has been reassigned to serve in the Winter Palace, a promotion she isn't happy about. She doesn't even use the proper Manchu phrases, Li complains, her voice a low hiss. She calls His Majesty my Emperor in her own tongue, not Son of Heaven. It's a disgrace. The other lady-in-waiting, a young girl named May, shushes her eyes wide with fear. Don't speak so. She's favoured. Favoured? She's an exotic pet, Li retorts, her bitterness boiling over. A toy for him to play with. But what happens when the game is over? She will be discarded, and we will be left to deal with the Empress's wrath. This exchange is just a small sample of the discontent. The gossip isn't just about Rongfei, it's about the disruption she represents. A quirky tidbit, one that would never make it into official history books, is the rumour that spread among the servants that Rongfei's beauty was not a gift from heaven, but a form of desert magic. They whispered that she had enchanted the Emperor with strange desert rituals and herbs. This story, born from a mix of fear, jealousy, and cultural misunderstanding, shows how people often create fantastical narratives to explain events that defy their understanding. In a world where order and tradition were everything, a spontaneous, genuine love was simply unbelievable. It had to be magic, or it had to be a trick. Historians still argue whether the widespread gossip and resentment among the palace staff were an organic response to the affair, or if they were subtly encouraged by the Empress and her loyalists. Was the discontent a natural reaction to a breach of protocol, or was it part of a larger orchestrated campaign to isolate and undermine Rongfei? The reality is probably a bit of both. The raw resentment was real, but it's not hard to imagine the Empress's faction fanning the flames, using the whispers as a tool to show the Emperor the extent of the disharmony he was causing. You follow a quiet, middle-aged eunuch, a man known for his discretion, as he walks toward the Empress's private courtyard. He's not a spy, but a loyal servant. He has no love for the political machinations, but he sees his duty in serving the proper order of things. He's carrying a small sealed box. You've seen this before. It contains reports, not of state affairs, but of the domestic life of the palace. He delivers the box to the Empress's lady-in-waiting. You're now seeing the Empress's network in action, a silent, efficient system that feeds her with information, giving her the ammunition she needs. The Emperor, meanwhile, seems blissfully unaware of the tempest he has unleashed. You see him in his private chambers, Rongfei by his side. She's showing him a small, intricate piece of embroidery, a pattern from her homeland. He's utterly captivated, not just by the object, but by her. He laughs, a rare, unguarded sound that you haven't heard since this whole affair began. He seems to have found a sanctuary in her, a place to escape the suffocating weight of his duties. He's not just an emperor in her presence, he is a man, and that is what terrifies the court. A human emperor is a vulnerable one. A human emperor can be swayed by emotion, by love. The court wants a god, a symbol of divine order. They do not want a man who is prone to whims and fancies. The whispers reflect this fear. They talk about the emperor's obsession, his neglect of duty, his betrayal of tradition. They are not just reporting on an affair, they are making a case against it. You see Consort Ling, the beautiful and ambitious concubine, walking the halls with a small group of her allies. Their chatter is light and innocuous, but their eyes are hard. You've learned to read the subtext of the court. When they say, "It is good to see the emperors in such high spirits," they mean, "We are watching and we are not happy." When they say, "We pray for the health and harmony of the imperial family," they mean, "We are plotting against her." The whispers have become a weapon. They are chipping away at Rongfei's legitimacy, at the emperor's authority, and at the very fabric of the court. The secret is no longer a secret. It's an open wound, and the gossip is the salt being poured into it. You get the sense that something has to give. The emperor cannot live in a bubble of blissful ignorance forever. The empress cannot simply rely on whispers. The confrontation is coming. The calm before the storm has passed, and you can already feel the first few drops of rain. The whispers have done their work. They have seeped into every crack and crevice of the palace, finally reaching the emperor's ears. The blissful bubble of his private world has been pierced, and the harsh reality of his responsibilities is now seeping in. You watch him, no longer the carefree, smitten man of a few weeks ago, but a figure weighed down by an impossible choice. He is caught between two worlds, the sacred duty of an emperor and the reckless devotion of a man in love. This is the heart of his vexing dilemma. He is in his study, a room filled with towering scrolls and ancient books, the air thick with the scent of aged paper and ink. He's supposed to be reviewing a memorial from a provincial governor, but his eyes keep straying to the window, to the distant courtyard of the Winter Palace. He's pacing, a rare sign of his inner turmoil. You know from a mainstream historical perspective that the Qianlong Emperor was famous for his long and prosperous reign, a time of unprecedented peace and stability for the Qing dynasty. He was a master of statecraft, a man who rarely showed emotion or weakness. And yet this affair has exposed a vulnerability that is utterly human. One of his senior Grand Councillors, a stoic old man with a long white beard, enters the room. He does not speak of Rongfei directly. Instead, he speaks of the tensions in the court, the unrest among the Manchu clans, and the need for a clear and unified line of succession. Every word is a hammer blow, a reminder of the emperor's primary duty. The Grand Councillor is not making a personal attack. He's reminding the emperor of the political dangers of his affection. A ruler's personal feelings, no matter how genuine, were always secondary to the stability of the empire. This was the unwritten contract of his office. Now for a quirky tidbit. There's a persistent legend, whispered in the back alleys of history, that the Qianlong Emperor was an expert puppeteer, not of people, but of actual small, intricate marionettes. He had a private collection of them, and he would use them to work through complex political scenarios, moving the small wooden figures as if they were his ministers and generals. You catch a glimpse of a small gilded box in the corner of his study. Is it his puppetry kit? You wonder if he's already using the little figures to try and find a way out of this impossible situation. Could he move a puppet version of the Empress and a puppet version of Rongfei and find a path where they can all coexist? It's a silly thought, a modern take on a historical struggle, but it makes you realise just how impossible his position is. And this brings us to a scholarly debate that's still going on. Historians still argue whether the emperor's public actions during this period were a sign of weakness or a demonstration of his masterful control. Was he truly so consumed by love that he was neglecting his duties, or was he playing a long game, using his public display of affection as a way to send a message to the Manchu elites? Was he subtly trying to show them that he, as the emperor, had the ultimate authority to defy tradition, and that his power was absolute? Maybe he was using the affair to test the loyalty of his ministers and to weed out those who would dare question his judgment. The answer, as always, is probably somewhere in the middle, a complex interplay of genuine emotion and calculated strategy. You see him summon Rongfei to his study. She enters, not with the demure, bowing deference of the other concubines, but with a quiet dignity. Her gaze is direct, unafraid. He does not speak of the court, the politics, or the danger. He talks to her about the history of the Manchu people, the great victories of his ancestors, the poems he has written. He is trying to share his world with her, to bridge the immense cultural chasm that separates them. He is seeking her understanding, her approval, her solace. He is trying to justify his love to himself by showing her what he loves most, his empire. Her response is simple but profound. She does not offer grand declarations of love or promises of unwavering loyalty. Instead, she listens intently, her head tilted, and asks a small, thoughtful question about one of the poems. It's a sign of her intelligence, a sign that she sees him not just as an emperor, but as a man with a heart and a mind. And in that moment you see his resolve strengthen. He has found a place of refuge in her, a sanctuary from the relentless pressures of his life. But the sanctuary is not a private one. The Empress's spies, the quiet, watchful eunuchs, are everywhere. The information they gather is immediately passed to her. She's not reacting with a hot emotional rage, but with the cold, patient precision of a chess master. She has a counter-move for every one of his. She sends her own message to the Emperor, not in a letter, but through her actions. She suddenly increases her presence at official ceremonies, her face a serene mask of virtuous duty. She reminds the court of her role, of her place, of her unwavering commitment to the dynasty. The Emperor's dilemma is no longer just a personal one. It has become a public spectacle, a quiet, tense drama being played out on the grand stage of the Forbidden City. He can no longer ignore the consequences of his actions. He has to choose the love of a woman who understands him, or the stability of an empire that has been his family's legacy for centuries. And the weight of that choice is almost unbearable. You watch him put his head in his hands, a gesture of profound weariness. The Son of Heaven, the most powerful man on earth, is utterly, painfully human. The Emperor's dilemma has spilled beyond the walls of his study and has now become the central playing piece in a high-stakes game of court politics. The secret affair, once a whispered curiosity, is now a dangerous political weapon. The court, a place where loyalty is a commodity and power is the only currency, is now split into two distinct factions. On one side, those who align with the Empress, the traditionalists who see Rongfei as a dangerous foreign influence. On the other, a smaller, more opportunistic group who align themselves with the Emperor's new favourite, hoping to ride the wave of her rising star. You, the silent observer, are caught in the middle, seeing the intricate moves and calculated risks from both sides. You observe the Grand Council, the Emperor's highest advisory body. The room is tense, the atmosphere thick with unspoken allegiances. A mainstream historical fact is that the Grand Council was the real power centre of the Qing dynasty, responsible for drafting policy and advising the Emperor. Its members were chosen from the most influential Manchu and Han clans, making it a microcosm of the political forces at play. One of the councillors, a stern Manchu aristocrat, speaks with feigned concern about the new customs being introduced into the palace. He doesn't mention Rongfei by name, but everyone in the room knows exactly who he means. He's talking about the foreign dances, the strange music, the shift in the Emperor's focus. He's painting a picture of a weakened, distracted Emperor, and he's using the affair as his primary evidence. Another councillor, a shrewd Han Chinese scholar, counters by praising the Emperor's vision for a unified and diverse empire. He speaks of how the Emperor's deep understanding of the border regions is a sign of his wisdom and a strength, not a weakness. He's cleverly reframing the Emperor's personal life as a political asset, a sign of his enlightened rule. You see the glances exchanged between them, the subtle nods and the almost invisible shakes of the head. This isn't about state policy anymore. It's about who has the Emperor's ear and who will be left out in the cold when this is all over. Now, for a quirky tidbit, the rivalry between the factions was so intense that it even extended to the imperial kitchens. You learn from a scullery maid that the Empress's faction began subtly sabotaging the dishes prepared for Rongfei, adding spices she wasn't used to, or making her meals taste bland. It was a petty, almost childish form of warfare, but it shows how far the animosity ran, and how every aspect of palace life, even the food, became a part of the political game. It's a reminder that even at the highest levels of power, people are still people, prone to spite and small acts of revenge. Historians still argue whether the Empress's faction was genuinely concerned about the dynasty's stability, or if they were simply using the affair as an excuse to consolidate their own power. Was the fear of a foreign concubine a real concern, or was it a convenient political narrative to use against the Emperor's supporters? The answer is complex. For many, Rongfei was a genuine threat to their way of life and their long-held traditions. For others, she was simply a tool to be used to gain a higher position in the court. The lines between personal grievance and political opportunism are blurry, and it's impossible to untangle them completely. You watch as Consort Ling, the ambitious concubine who saw her place usurped by Rongfei, makes her move. She's an ally of the Empress, and you see her walk through the gardens, a picture of quiet distress. She meets with a young, impressionable minister who is new to the court and is still trying to find his footing. She talks to him about her concerns for the Emperor's health, and her fear that he is being influenced by outsiders. She's an expert at this game, using her vulnerability as a weapon. She's planting the seeds of doubt, not with loud accusations, but with quiet, concerned words that will fester in his mind. Meanwhile, Rongfei seems to be an unwitting player in this game. You see her in her private courtyard, practicing calligraphy. She's not a strategist or a politician. She's simply a woman trying to make a life for herself in a strange and overwhelming place. The Emperor is her one connection, her one ally, and she clings to him with a quiet desperation. But her innocence is also a liability. She doesn't understand the depth of the game being played around her. She doesn't see the daggers hidden behind the polite smiles of the ministers, or the subtle machinations of the court ladies. The Emperor is aware of the game. He sees the split in his court, the subtle acts of defiance from his ministers. His dilemma is no longer just a private choice, it's a test of his authority. If he backs down, he will show that he is weak and can be controlled. If he continues, he risks an open rebellion, a fracture in his court that could have disastrous consequences for his reign. He is walking a tightrope, with the weight of his personal feelings and the fate of his empire on either side. He makes a bold move. He announces a grand ceremony in Rongfei's honour, a public display of his affection that will leave no doubt about her place in the palace. It's a challenge to the Empress's faction, a declaration that his will is supreme. It's a move that will either crush his opposition or ignite an open fire. You can feel the tension in the air as the news spreads through the palace. The game has escalated, and the next move will be a crucial one. The Emperor's declaration of a grand ceremony in Rongfei's honour sent a shockwave through the Forbidden City. It was no longer just a dangerous political game, it was now an open challenge. The Empress and her faction, once relying on subtle whispers and quiet machinations, now knew they had to act decisively. Their fear was no longer about a loss of influence, but about the very order of the universe, the sacred balance of power that had held their world together for centuries. You, the silent observer, now see the game escalate from politics to a full-blown conspiracy, a plot hatched in the shadows of the imperial gardens. You find yourself in the secluded, moonlit courtyard of the Empress's residence. The air is cold and still. The only sound is the rustle of leaves and the low murmur of voices. The Empress is meeting with her most trusted allies. Consort Ling, the ambitious and bitter concubine, and a few high-ranking eunuchs who have been loyal to her family for generations. This isn't a social gathering, it's a war council. The Empress's face, usually so serene, is now a mask of cold fury. He dares to elevate her above us all, she says, her voice a low hiss. He shames our lineage, our traditions. Consort Ling, ever the pragmatist, cuts to the chase. We must make him see reason. We must remove her. The term remove her hangs in the air, cold and menacing. You know, from a mainstream historical perspective, that the imperial harem was a place of intense rivalry, and the methods used to remove a rival were often ruthless. This could mean anything from subtle poisonings and arranged accidents to slandering the concubine and her family to the point of a public execution. The palace was a gilded cage, but the bars were made of steel, and the politics could be lethal. This wasn't just a bedtime story, this was a historical thriller, a real-life Game of Thrones with the fate of an empire at stake. Now for a quirky tidbit, the Empress's chief eunuch, a man named Zhao, was known for his love of poetry. He would often speak in verse, a habit that annoyed his peers but amused the Empress. In this grim meeting he offers a line from an old poem. The thorn must be plucked before it pierces the heart. It's a poetic way of saying they must kill Rongfei, but the symbolism is chillingly clear. This use of flowery language to cloak a brutal intent shows how deeply ingrained the culture of indirection and subtle threat was in the court. Historians still argue whether the Empress's faction ever truly intended to kill Rongfei, or if their plot was a bluff, a strategic maneuver to force the Emperor's hand. Was the conspiracy a genuine assassination attempt, or was it simply a show of force, a way to scare the Emperor into banishing her? The records are murky, full of veiled language and coded messages. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. The Empress was a woman of immense power, and she had the means and the motive to do so. However, she was also a woman who was obsessed with tradition and order. A scandal as big as an assassination would have caused chaos and instability, the very things she was fighting to prevent. It's a fascinating paradox. You see the plot take form. They don't plan a direct assault. That would be too risky and too public. Instead, they decide on a more subtle approach. They will use the system against Rongfei. They will fabricate evidence of her disloyalty, of her treasonous ties to her family in the far west. They will bribe and coerce witnesses, planting false rumours among her own staff and the lower-ranking eunuchs. They will create a narrative of a scheming foreign woman who's trying to corrupt the emperor and undermine the dynasty. It's a brilliant, insidious plan as old as power itself. You watch as Consort Ling meets with a frightened servant from Rongfei's retinue. She doesn't threaten the girl with violence. She offers her a beautiful jade bracelet and promises her a promotion to a more prestigious role. The girl is desperate, a small, scared cog in a vast machine. The offer is too good to refuse. The conspiracy is being built not with swords and daggers, but with promises and fear. Meanwhile, the emperor, still in his bubble of affection, is planning the grand ceremony. He's commissioning special music, designing new clothes, and even writing a poem in Rongfei's honour. He's so consumed by his love that he seems oblivious to the storm brewing around him. He sees the court as a family, and he is a man trying to unite two disparate parts of it. He doesn't understand that the other side sees him as a threat, and they are preparing for war. You see Rongfei, the unwitting target of this conspiracy, in her courtyard. She is a woman of great dignity and grace, but she is not a warrior. She's unaware of the danger she's in. She is preparing for the ceremony, excited by the prospect of celebrating her love for the emperor. Her innocence is her greatest strength and her greatest vulnerability. She's a lamb being led to the slaughter, and the wolves are all around her, hidden behind the polite facade of the court. The conspiracy takes shape in the shadows. The false evidence is being created, the witnesses are being paid off, and the narrative is being woven. The Empress is not just reacting to the affair, she is taking the offensive. She's not a woman consumed by jealousy. She is a strategist fighting for what she believes is right. And the Emperor is a man who is so blinded by his love that he cannot see the danger. The stage is set for a quiet but devastating coup. Rongfei, the woman at the centre of this storm, was for a long time an innocent bystander. She was a gift, a symbol, a pawn in a game she didn't know was being played. But the whispers, the cold stares, and the subtle acts of sabotage have not gone unnoticed. She is not a fool. The blissful bubble of her world, so lovingly created by the Emperor, has begun to show cracks. You, the silent observer, now watch as the once passive concubine begins to shed her innocence and learn to navigate the treacherous political landscape. You find her in her courtyard, not practicing calligraphy or dancing, but speaking with her personal maid, a woman named Pulan, who came with her from her homeland. Pulan, who has her ears to the ground, is visibly distressed. She tells Rongfei of the subtle insults, the refusal of certain staff to obey her orders, and the thinly veiled threats from the Empress's faction. Rongfei listens, her face unreadable. Her eyes, however, are now filled with a new kind of light. Not of fear, but of comprehension. She's beginning to understand that her love for the Emperor is a dangerous thing, and her life and his are at stake. A mainstream historical fact. Many concubines in the Qing dynasty were not just beautiful faces. They were often intelligent, educated women who served as crucial advisors to the Emperor. They had to be. Their survival depended on it. They learned to read the politics of the court, to understand the web of alliances and rivalries, and to use their influence to protect themselves and their families. Rongfei's transformation from a passive concubine to an active player in this game is not an anomaly. It's a historical inevitability. Now for a quirky tidbit. It's rumoured that Rongfei, in an effort to understand the court, started collecting and reading the little slips of paper that would be given to her with the day's menu. She would look for patterns, for subtle changes in the food that would indicate a power shift. For example, if a certain dish was removed from her menu after she received a gift from the Emperor, she would know that the Empress's faction was retaliating. This was her own little intelligence network, a silent way of understanding the forces moving against her. This shows her resourcefulness and her quiet determination to not be a victim. This brings us to a scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether Rongfei's actions were a sign of a natural aptitude for politics, or if they were the result of the Emperor's careful tutoring. Was she a natural strategist, or was he moulding her into a political ally, a woman who could help him in his battle against the traditionalists? It's hard to tell. She was a woman from a different world, but she was also a princess, raised in a world of power and privilege. She would have had some understanding of the way court life worked. Maybe the Emperor saw her potential and helped her hone her skills, or maybe he was simply so blinded by his love that he didn't realise he was putting her in an impossible position. You see her take her first step into the political fray. She does not confront anyone directly. Instead, she chooses a more subtle path. She begins to form her own alliances. She starts with the younger, less powerful concubines, who are also a little intimidated by the Empress's faction. She offers them small kindnesses, little gifts, and a sympathetic ear. She doesn't talk about politics. She talks about their shared love for the Emperor, about their shared hopes for the future. She's building a network of support, a quiet army of allies who will speak on her behalf, who will carry her messages, and who will serve as her eyes and ears in the court. She also begins to use her influence with the Emperor more wisely. She no longer asks for lavish gifts or special privileges. Instead, she uses their private moments to talk about the court, to ask him questions about his ministers and his advisors. She learns who he trusts, who he fears, and who he is watching. She's not giving him advice or making demands. She's simply gathering information, building a mental map of the dangers that surround them. One day you are a fly on the wall in the Emperor's study. He's speaking to a young minister, the same one Consort Ling had tried to influence. The minister is nervous, stumbling over his words. Rongfei, who is present, simply smiles and asks a simple question about a poem the Emperor had written. The question is a distraction, a way of giving the minister a moment to compose himself. The minister, grateful for the reprieve, looks at her with a new sense of respect. She has just won a small battle, not with a show of power, but with a simple act of kindness. Rongfei is no longer just a beautiful face or a political pawn. She's a woman who is learning to fight for her life and for the man she loves. She's learning the rules of a game she never asked to play. She's growing stronger, more resilient, and more dangerous. The Empress's faction, consumed by their own plotting, is underestimating her. They see her as a foreign interloper, a fleeting fancy. But you, the silent observer, know the truth. They are no longer fighting a passive concubine. They are fighting a woman who is learning to fight back, and she has nothing left to lose. And in a world of protocol and artifice, a woman who has nothing to lose is the most dangerous of all. The air in the Forbidden City, once thick with whispers and veiled threats, is now electrified with anticipation. The day of the grand ceremony has arrived. This is no longer a clandestine affair. It is a public spectacle, a defiant act of love and power. The Emperor, a man who for so long was a prisoner of his duty, is now making a bold statement. He's forcing the court to bear witness to his unwavering commitment to Rongfei. You, the silent observer, are about to witness history unfold, not in a hushed corner, but on the grand stage of the Hall of Supreme Harmony. The Hall of Supreme Harmony is the largest building in the Forbidden City, reserved for the most important state functions. As you stand in the crowd, you feel the weight of tradition. The courtiers are all in their finest robes, their faces a study in practiced neutrality. But their eyes, their subtle movements, tell a different story. The Empress is seated on a throne to the side, her face a serene mask, but her hands are clasped so tightly that her knuckles are white. Consort Ling and her allies are scattered throughout the crowd, their faces a mix of barely concealed fury and anxious curiosity. This is the moment they have been waiting for, the public test of the Emperor's resolve. A mainstream historical fact is that Qing dynasty ceremonies were meticulously choreographed events, where every gesture, every location, and every piece of clothing had a specific symbolic meaning. The Emperor's decision to hold a ceremony for Rongfei in this sacred space was a direct affront to every unwritten rule of the court. He was not just honouring a concubine, He was elevating her to a status that was previously reserved only for the Empress herself. This was a revolutionary act, a deliberate and public violation of centuries of tradition. Now for a quirky tidbit. The Emperor, a man of great artistic talent, had personally overseen the creation of a new kind of musical instrument for the ceremony. It was a fusion of traditional Manchu and Uyghur instruments, a symbolic melding of their cultures. The music it produced was strange and beautiful, unlike anything the court had ever heard. It was an oral representation of his defiance, a harmony born from two disparate worlds. The courtiers, accustomed to the familiar rigid tones of their own music, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They were witnessing a new era, and the sound of it was jarring to their ears. Historians still argue whether the Emperor's defiance was a sign of a profound, genuine love, or if it was a final, desperate attempt to assert his absolute authority over a court that was beginning to question him. Was he blinded by his affection, or was he a master manipulator, using his personal life to send a message to his powerful ministers? The answer is probably a bit of both. He was a man who genuinely loved this woman, but he was also a man who was used to getting his way. The ceremony was both a grand romantic gesture and a stunning show of force, a declaration that his will was supreme. You watch as Rongfei enters the hall. She is not in her traditional Uyghur clothing, but in a stunning custom-made Manchu robe, a gift from the Emperor. The robe is embroidered with symbols of her homeland, a visual representation of the cultural fusion the Emperor was trying to achieve. She walks with a quiet grace, her head held high. She's no longer just the concubine. She's a woman with a purpose, a woman who understands her place in this grand political drama. She's not a pawn. She's a player. The Emperor is waiting for her on his throne. He does not simply nod or offer a small smile. He descends the stairs, a move so unprecedented that a collective gasp ripples through the crowd. He meets her halfway, takes her hand, and leads her to the front of the hall. He introduces her to the court, not with her concubine title, but with a new honorific name he has given her. He speaks of her grace, her intelligence, and her courage. His words are not hollow praises. They are filled with a genuine, palpable affection that is almost shocking in its intensity. Consort Ling's face is a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. She had been passed over for this honour for years, and now a newcomer, a foreigner, was being elevated to a status she had only dreamed of. You see her whisper to a minister beside her, her voice shaking with rage. The conspiracy is no longer a secret, it's a living, breathing entity, and its members are ready to strike. The Emperor's bold defiance is no longer just a challenge, it's a declaration of war. The ceremony ends, but the tension in the air remains. The Emperor has made his move. He has publicly chosen his side. He has defied his family, his court, and his people. He has shown them that his love is not a weakness, but a strength, a force that can bend the very rules of the universe. But you know that this act of defiance will not go unanswered. The Empress and her faction will not let this stand. The stage is now set for a final and devastating confrontation. A battle not just for a man's heart, but for the soul of an empire. The grand ceremony is over, but its aftershocks are still rippling through the Forbidden City. The Emperor's public defiance was a gauntlet thrown down, and you know the Empress, the master of quiet power, is not one to let such a challenge go unanswered. The stage has been set for the final, devastating confrontation, a battle not of swords, but of wills, of tradition versus love. You feel a knot tighten in your stomach as you're led, a silent ghost, to the heart of the imperial living quarters, where the two great powers of the empire are about to collide. You're in the Empress's private audience chamber. It's a space of muted grandeur, filled with dark wood furniture and intricate porcelain. The air is still, heavy with the scent of sandalwood. The Empress is seated on her low throne, her posture perfect, her face a serene mask. But her eyes, usually so placid, are now a cold, stormy grey. The Emperor enters, not with the swagger of his public persona, but with the quiet weariness of a man who knows a storm is coming. He is not here to argue, he is here to face the music. A mainstream historical fact is that the Empress, as the head of the imperial harem, had immense authority over the day-to-day life of the court. She was not just a figurehead, she was a powerful administrator, and her word on all matters of protocol and family was absolute. Her power was a quiet domestic one, but it was no less potent than the Emperor's public power. The confrontation you are about to witness is a clash of two different kinds of power, one that commands armies and another that commands the very fabric of society. Now for a quirky tidbit. There's a rumour, a bit of historical folklore, that the Empress had a hidden collection of rare, intricately carved snuff bottles. She was a secret collector, and each bottle represented a problem she had to deal with. The more complex the problem, the more intricate the bottle. You see her today, holding a plain jade snuff bottle, the kind she would use for simple, everyday matters. This is not a simple matter. It shows her confidence, her belief that this confrontation, no matter how difficult, is a matter of her will versus his. It's a small detail, but it speaks volumes about her mindset. This brings us to a crucial scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether the Empress's anger was purely personal, or if it was a final, desperate attempt to save the dynasty from the Emperor's recklessness. Was her primary motivation jealousy, or was it a genuine belief that Rongfei was a threat to the stability of the empire? The truth is, it's likely a combination of both. She was a woman who had devoted her entire life to a system that was now being threatened by a rival. Her personal feelings were inseparable from her political duty. The Empress speaks first. Her voice is calm, devoid of any emotional turmoil. She does not mention Rongfei by name. She speaks of the need for order, of the respect for ancestral law, and of the grave responsibility he holds as the son of heaven. She's not pleading with him. She's reminding him of his duty. She's using the very language of his power against him. She's essentially saying, "You are the Emperor. Act like one." The Emperor listens, his face unreadable. He doesn't interrupt. When she's finished, he speaks, his voice low and firm. He does not apologize for his actions. He speaks of a new kind of empire, one that is built on unity and mutual respect, not rigid tradition. He praises Rongfei, not just for her beauty, but for her intelligence and her spirit. He is telling her that he is not just a ruler, but a man, and that his love is a strength, not a weakness. He is not backing down. The conversation is a masterclass in polite cutting rhetoric. The Empress uses the past, the weight of 1,000 years of tradition, as her weapon. The Emperor uses the future, the promise of a new kind of world, as his. The air is thick with the unspoken, with the years of duty and expectation that have defined their lives. But then, Consort Ling, the ambitious and bitter concubine who was at the heart of the conspiracy, enters the room. She has been waiting for this moment. She bows to the Emperor, but her face is a mask of false grief. "Your Majesty," she says, her voice trembling, "I have come with grave news." She begins to speak of the discontent among the palace staff, of the fears of the Manchu clans and of the threats being made against Rongfei. She's not just reporting, she's fabricating a narrative, a story of a palace on the brink of revolt. The Emperor's face hardens. He knows what she is doing. He knows this is a setup. But the Empress, who's been listening intently, sees her opportunity. She turns to the Emperor. "You see, Your Majesty," she says, her voice still calm, "your actions have caused great disharmony. Your own people are afraid. For the good of the Empire, you must choose." She presents him with a sealed scroll. It's an order of banishment for Rongfei, a command for her to return to her homeland. A cold, hard document that would end this affair once and for all. The Emperor looks at the scroll, then at the Empress, then at Consort Ling. He is being cornered. He can either give in and save the Empire from a potential revolt, or he can stand his ground and risk chaos. For a moment, the silence in the room is deafening. The fate of an empire hangs in the balance. The Emperor, the man who rules over millions, is in an impossible position, a prisoner of his heart and his duty. He looks at the scroll in the Empress's hand. He sees the cold, unyielding power of tradition. He looks at Consort Ling's face, a mirror of all the resentment and malice in the court. He sees the danger his love has created, and you, the silent observer, know that his choice will determine not just his fate, but the fate of the entire dynasty. This silent confrontation with the Empress and her loyalists had pushed the Emperor to a breaking point. Cornered and faced with a direct challenge to his will, a man caught between duty and desire made a choice that would reverberate through the empire for generations. He had been given an ultimatum: banish Rongfei or face a fracturing court. For a moment it seemed as though the Empress had won. But the Emperor was a man who played the long game, and you, the silent observer, are about to witness the most stunning of all his countermoves. He did not sign the order of banishment. He did not yell or plead. He He took the scroll from the Empress's hand, his expression unreadable, and calmly placed it on a nearby table. "The harmony of my family," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "is a matter for me alone. As for the dynasty, I assure you it is in no danger." It was a subtle but devastating checkmate. He was not giving in. He was asserting his ultimate authority. The Empress's face, a mask of control for so long, finally showed a flicker of shock and defeat. The weeks that followed were filled with a tense, brittle calm. The affair continued, but the whispers had been replaced by a quiet, simmering resentment. The Empress and her faction, defeated for now, retreated into the shadows, but you knew their plotting was not over. They were simply waiting for the next opportunity, the next weakness to exploit. That opportunity came in the form of a new rumour, a different kind of whisper that began to spread through the palace. It wasn't about love or politics, it was about life. Rongfei was with child. You see the palace in a flurry of hushed activity. Doctors are brought in, the best in the land. Eunuchs are sent scurrying with special herbs and medicines. The Emperor, a man who already had many sons, is suddenly filled with a different kind of joy, a quiet, almost reverent awe. A mainstream historical fact is that in the Qing dynasty, the status of a concubine's son was determined by the mother's rank. A son born to a low-ranking concubine could not challenge for the throne, while a son born to a high-ranking concubine like Rongfei could potentially be considered for succession. The birth of this son, a new male heir, was a massive shift in the dynastic landscape. This was no longer just an affair, it was a dynastic event. This was the historical equivalent of a quiet dinner party suddenly being interrupted by a marching band. It changed everything. Now for a quirky tidbit, the Emperor, in a moment of pure, unadulterated excitement, ordered the creation of a miniature gilded palanquin for the baby. It was a tiny, perfect replica of the ones used for the imperial family, and it was so small it could be carried by a single eunuch. It was a whimsical, almost childish gesture that showed the depth of his happiness. It was a clear, visible sign that this child, a product of his love, was not just another heir. He was a prince, born of an affair that was meant to be a secret, and he would be treated as such. Historians still argue whether the birth of the son solidified the Emperor's resolve, or if it was the catalyst that finally made the Empress act decisively. Did the birth of the child strengthen his position, giving him a powerful dynastic reason to protect Rongfei? Or did it simply make her a greater threat than she had ever been before? A rival who was not just after his heart, but was now a mother of a potential heir to the throne. The answer is probably a bit of both. For the Emperor, the son was a symbol of his love's ultimate triumph. For the Empress, he was a walking, breathing monument to her defeat. You see the Empress, her face pale and drawn after she receives the news. She's not a woman prone to outbursts, but her grief and fury are palpable. She goes to the Hall of Ancestors, a sacred place in the Forbidden City, and stands before the tablets of her forefathers. She's not praying for the baby's death. She's praying for the return of order, for the end of the chaos this affair has created. She's a woman who has been pushed to her limit, and you know, with a sense of dread, that this is the moment she will finally unleash her most devastating weapon. The Emperor, meanwhile, is in a world of his own. He is no longer just the son of heaven. He is a father, a man in love, a ruler who has finally found a kind of personal happiness. He is teaching Rongfei how to hold the baby, how to sing to him in the Manchu language. He is not just being a father, he's building a new kind of family, a fusion of two worlds. He is defying tradition, not with a public statement, but with every quiet, loving act. But you know this cannot last. The birth of a son, a male heir, has raised the stakes to an unimaginable height. The Empress's faction is no longer plotting against a concubine. They are plotting against a prince. The love story has now become a dynastic war, and the first battle is about to begin. The calm, the quiet, the momentary happiness is a lie. The storm is coming, and it will not be just a storm of whispers and threats. It will be a storm of betrayal and vengeance, and you know, with a sickening certainty, that no one, not even the Emperor, will be able to stop it. The birth of a son, a male heir to the throne, from the concubine was the final straw. For the Empress, a woman who had spent her life upholding the sacred order of the dynasty, it was an unforgivable act of betrayal. Her grief and fury, once so carefully concealed, have now solidified into a cold, hard resolve. She's no longer just a wronged wife. She's a vengeful force, a woman who will stop at nothing to restore the order she believes has been violated. You, the silent observer, are about to witness her most devastating and cruel act of vengeance. The setting is the Empress's private audience chamber. It's early morning, and the light is grey and unforgiving. The room, which once felt so serene, is now a place of cold, menacing efficiency. The Empress is seated at her desk, not writing poetry or doing calligraphy, but reading a series of reports from her spies. She's in full control, a general planning a final brutal assault. Consort Ling, the ambitious and bitter concubine, is at her side, her face a mask of triumphant malice. The conspiracy, once a quiet murmur, is now a carefully orchestrated plan of attack. A mainstream historical fact is that the Empress, as the head of the imperial harem, had the authority to strip a concubine of her title, her residence, and her privileges. She could even order her to be confined to a remote, desolate palace for the rest of her life. This was the most powerful weapon in her arsenal, a legal and devastating way to remove a rival without resorting to public scandal or violence. She would not kill Rongfei. She would simply erase her from existence. Now, for a quirky tidbit, the Empress, in a subtle act of psychological warfare, ordered that all of Rongfei's personal effects be meticulously catalogued and sealed in a large red lacquered chest. This chest, a physical manifestation of her loss, would be placed in a public storage room for all the staff to see. It was a clear message to the court. Rongfei was being written out of history, and her love for the Emperor would be nothing but a forgotten memory. It was an act of pure, elegant cruelty. Historians still argue whether the Empress's vengeance was a sign of a truly malevolent character, or if it was the act of a woman who was simply pushed to her limit. Was she a monster, or was she a victim of a system that put her in an impossible position? The answer is probably a mix of both. The system and the Emperor's betrayal created the monster. She was a woman who was raised to believe in a certain kind of order, and when that order was threatened, she would do anything to restore it. The plan unfolds with a chilling efficiency. The Empress, using a fabricated charge of disloyalty to the throne, an undermining of dynastic harmony, orders the immediate confinement of Rongfei. You see the Empress's chief eunuch, the same one who spoke in poetic verses, enter Rongfei's courtyard with a detachment of guards. There are no shouts, no struggle. Rongfei, the woman who had learned to fight back, is now a woman in chains, a victim of a system she can't fight. She's not a person anymore, she's a problem to be solved. The Emperor is not there to save her. He's away on a hunting trip, a carefully planned ruse by the Empress's faction to give them enough time to carry out their plan without his interference. When he returns, the deed will be done, and it will be too late for him to do anything about it. He will be forced to accept it or risk an open conflict with the Empress and her allies, a conflict that could have disastrous consequences for the dynasty. You see Rongfei being led away from her courtyard, her head held high, her face a mask of quiet dignity. She's being stripped of her title, her home, her love, and her freedom. But in her eyes you see a flash of something else. Not defeat, but a cold, burning hatred. She's not just a victim. She's a woman who has been wronged, and she will not forget this. The love story has been replaced by a tragedy, a brutal and devastating act of vengeance. The most tragic part of the plan is the son. The Empress, in her cold, calculating cruelty, does not harm the baby. Instead, she orders that he be taken away from his mother and given to another, more suitable concubine to be raised. She will not be a part of his life. She will not be allowed to raise him, to teach him her language, to fill his head with stories of her homeland. She's being erased from his life, a ghost in his own family. The son, a symbol of their love, has become a tool of her vengeance, a permanent reminder of her defeat. The Empress has won. She has crushed her rival, restored the order of the court, and reasserted her authority. She has shown the Emperor that he is not a man who can do as he pleases, but a ruler who is bound by the rules of his office. She has won the battle, but she has lost the war. She has turned a rival into a vengeful enemy, and a husband into a broken man. And the son, a quiet, innocent victim, will grow up in a world of secrets and lies, a walking, breathing reminder of his parents' tragic love story. The Empress's vengeful retaliation was swift and absolute. She had not only stripped Rongfei of her titles and privileges, but had ordered her permanent banishment. The once favoured concubine, a woman who had stood at the heart of the Emperor's affection, was now a ghost in her own home. a prisoner of a system that had no room for love or defiance. You, the silent observer, are about to witness the saddest and most brutal part of this story. Her final moments in the palace and her long, lonely journey into exile. The scene is the Winter Palace, the very place that the Emperor had once lavished with so much affection. It is no longer a place of warmth and love, but a place of cold, desolate emptiness. The beautiful gardens are now overgrown with weeds. The intricate tapestries have been taken down. The golden roofs, once so bright, now look dull and lifeless. The only sign of a life is a small retinue of eunuchs, not the Emperor's personal guard, but a group of low-ranking servants who have been assigned to escort her to a remote, abandoned palace in the far north. A mainstream historical fact is that banishment was a common punishment for disgraced concubines. They were sent to remote, desolate palaces, often in the far corners of the empire, where they would live out the rest of their lives in isolation and shame. It was a punishment worse than death, a way of erasing a person from history while they were still alive. Rongfei's banishment was not just a physical journey, it was a journey into utter historical obscurity. Now for a quirky tidbit. As Rongfei was being led away, she was not allowed to take any of her personal possessions, except for a small, intricately embroidered handkerchief. It was a gift from the Emperor, given to her during their first meeting. She clutched it in her hand, the only tangible link she had to the man she loved. This small, insignificant piece of cloth was her last connection to a world of love, power, and privilege. It was a tiny, sad detail that spoke volumes about her immense loss. Historians still argue whether the Empress's decision to banish Rongfei to the far north was an act of extreme cruelty or a political calculation. Was she simply trying to hurt her rival as much as possible, or was she trying to send her as far away from the capital as possible to ensure that the Emperor could never find her, could never see her again? The answer is probably a bit of both. The cruelty was a part of her vengeance, but the distance was a part of her strategy. She was a woman who was obsessed with order, and distance was the ultimate form of control. You watch as Rongfei is led to the palanquin, a small, simple one, not the magnificent gilded one she was once given. Her face is a mask of quiet dignity. She does not plead or cry. She does not look back at the palace, at the place where she once found love and happiness. She looks forward, her eyes filled with a cold, burning resolve. She's no longer just the concubine or the fragrant princess. She is a woman who has been wronged, a woman who is now on a journey of revenge. She is not a victim, she is a survivor. The Empress watches from her window, her face unreadable. She has won. She has crushed her rival and reasserted her authority. She has shown the Emperor that his will is not absolute, that he is still bound by the rules of the dynasty. But in her victory, you see a deep, abiding sadness. She has lost something in this battle, a part of her own humanity. She has turned a rival into a vengeful enemy, and in doing so she has created a ghost that will haunt the palace for a long, long time. The Emperor, when he returns from his hunting trip, is told that Rongfei has been sent to a remote palace for her own safety, a diplomatic lie that is meant to spare him from a painful truth. He's not a fool. He knows what has happened. He is in his private study, a room that once felt so full of love and laughter, now feels cold and empty. He looks at the beautiful, intricate painting of a Rongfei that he has on his wall, a small private portrait that only he is allowed to see. He looks at it, and a single tear, the only tear you will ever see him shed, falls down his cheek. He is the most powerful man in the world, and he is utterly, completely helpless. The palanquin carrying the banished concubine disappears into the vast, unforgiving landscape of the empire. The journey is long and arduous. The roads are rough, the weather is cold, but Rongfei does not complain. She is a woman on a mission. She is not just a prisoner, she is a survivor. She is a woman who has lost everything, and in her loss, she has found a new kind of strength. The love story has ended. The tragic love story has been replaced by a story of vengeance and survival. And the ghost of the concubine, the woman who dared to love a man who was the son of heaven, will haunt the Forbidden City for a long, long time. The banishment of Rongfei was a wound that festered. For the Emperor, it was more than just the loss of a lover. It was a profound public defeat. He had lost the battle for his own heart, and in doing so he had lost a part of his soul. The man who had once been so vibrant and defiant was now a ghost in his own palace. The Forbidden City, a place of immense power, had become a cold, empty tomb, a testament to a love that had been crushed by the weight of tradition. You, the silent observer, are now watching the Emperor's slow descent into sorrow and neglect. The air in the hall of mental cultivation, the Emperor's private sanctuary, is thick with a different kind of silence. It is no longer the silence of contemplation, but the silence of grief. He is seated at his desk, the endless memorials and decrees from his ministers piled high, but he does not touch them. He sits for hours, his head in his hands, staring at a small, beautiful portrait of Rongfei, the one he had commissioned in secret. The painting is a reminder of a happiness that is now forever lost to him. A mainstream historical fact is that the Qianlong Emperor's reign, which was so long and prosperous, had a distinct period of decline in his later years. Historians often point to a series of personal tragedies and a growing disinterest in state affairs. While the historical records don't explicitly state that his grief over Rongfei was the cause, they do note a significant change in his demeanour and a shift in his focus away from the day-to-day affairs of the empire. His heart was broken, and in doing so, he broke a part of his empire. Now for a quirky tidbit. The emperor, in his grief, stopped playing his favourite instrument, a delicate 7-stringed guqin. The guqin was a symbol of harmony and inner peace, and he had been a master of it. He would sit for hours, his hands poised over the strings, but he would not play. The instrument, now a silent, beautiful monument to his sadness, was a clear sign to his inner circle that the harmony he had once found with Rongfei was now gone, and he could not find it again. Historians still argue whether the emperor's neglect of his duties was a sign of true depression or a form of passive aggression against the empress and her faction. Was he genuinely heartbroken, or was he deliberately neglecting his duties to show the court the consequences of their actions? Was he silently telling them, "You wanted me to be a dutiful emperor, and now you have a dutiful emperor who has no interest in ruling"? The answer is probably a bit of both. His grief was real, but it was also a tool he could use to express his frustration and his anger. The Empress, meanwhile, is triumphant. She is a woman who has won her battle, but her victory is a hollow one. The Emperor is a stranger to her now. He does not speak to her. He does not seek her counsel. He is a king who rules over a vast, prosperous empire, but in his own home, he is a man who is utterly alone. She has restored order, but she has done so at the cost of her own happiness and the love of the man she was sworn to serve. Consort Ling, the ambitious and bitter concubine, is also triumphant. She has been elevated in the ranks of the imperial harem, and she has secured her position. She is now the most powerful concubine in the palace, a position she had always coveted. But she too is a victim of her own success. The emperor is cold to her. He treats her with a polite but distant formality. She has won the game, but the prize is not what she had expected. The most tragic part of this section is the young son, the child who was born of a forbidden love. He's growing up in a world of silence and sadness. He's a little boy who does not know his mother. He's being raised by a concubine who is afraid to love him too much, lest she incur the emperor's wrath. He's a living, breathing reminder of the tragic affair, a symbol of the immense loss that has befallen the palace. The emperor, in his grief, finds solace in the only thing he has left, his son. He spends hours with the young boy, teaching him how to write, how to ride a horse, how to read the ancient texts. He is not just being a father, he is trying to give the boy the love he could not give to his mother. He is trying to create a legacy for a woman who was erased from history. He is a man who has lost everything, but he is not a man who has given up. He is a man who is fighting for his son, a man who is fighting for the memory of the woman he loved. And in that fight you see a flicker of the old defiance, a quiet, burning resolve that will one day come back to haunt the Empress. The years have passed. The sorrow in the Forbidden City has not disappeared, but it has settled, like a fine layer of dust over everything. The Emperor, now an old man, has found a new kind of purpose. He's no longer consumed by his grief, but by a quiet, burning ambition. His focus is on his son, the child who was born of a forbidden love, the prince who is a living, breathing testament to the woman he lost. You, the silent observer, now watch as this young prince, a new hope for the dynasty, begins to show signs of his mother's influence. The prince, now a teenager, is a remarkable young man. He is not like the other princes, who are groomed to be stoic, emotionless symbols of the state. He is intelligent, compassionate, and has a quiet, burning fire in his eyes that reminds you so much of his mother. He is a master of martial arts, a skill he learned from his father's best generals. But he is also a poet, a scholar, and a lover of art. A side of him that his father has nurtured in secret. He's the perfect blend of his two parents, the warrior spirit of the emperor and the quiet, artistic soul of the concubine. A mainstream historical fact is that the Qianlong emperor's reign was one of the longest in Chinese history, and he was a master of shaping his own legacy. He handpicked his successor, a move that was unprecedented in the Qing dynasty. He had many sons, but he chose this one, the son of the banished concubine, to be his heir. This was not just a personal choice. It was a political statement, a final, defiant act of a man who was still in control of his own destiny. Now, for a quirky tidbit, the prince, in his youth, would often sneak into the imperial library, a place filled with ancient texts and rare books to read the informal court records. He was not looking for state documents or political treatises. He was looking for stories about a concubine who was said to be beautiful and kind. He found old, forgotten records of her poems and her letters, and he pieced together a picture of the mother he never knew. This quiet act of rebellion, this deep desire to know his own history, was a sign of a young man who was not going to be a puppet of the court but a ruler in his own right. Historians still argue whether the emperor's decision to choose this son as his heir was a final act of love for Rongfei or a calculated move to ensure the dynasty would be in the hands of a strong independent ruler. Was he trying to honour his love for the banished concubine, or was he simply choosing the best man for the job? The answer is probably a bit of both. He saw in his son a reflection of himself, and a reflection of the woman he loved. He saw a man who was not just a product of the court, but a man who was a product of a great but tragic love story. The Empress, now an old woman, is a shadow of her former self. Her victory was a hollow one. The Emperor is cold to her. The court respects her, but does not love her. The young prince, the boy she had tried to erase from history, is now her constant reminder of her defeat. He is polite to her, respectful, but there is a quiet distance between them. He is her victory and her greatest defeat. The young prince, who has learned his lessons well, knows the dangers of the court. He knows the history of his mother. He knows the power of the empress and her faction, but he does not show it. He is a master of his own emotions, a man who knows how to play the game without being a pawn. He is a new kind of ruler, a man who is not a prisoner of the past, but a man who is looking to the future. He has a final, private meeting with his father, the emperor. The emperor, now a fragile old man, is lying in his bed. He is weak, but his eyes are clear and full of love. He tells his son the true story of his mother, the story of a great love that was crushed by the weight of tradition. He tells him about the empress, about the conspiracy, and about his own helplessness. He's not making excuses. He's giving his son a final, crucial piece of information, a key to understanding the history of his own family and the history of the court. "My son," he says, his voice a frail whisper, "remember your mother. Remember her courage, her dignity and her love. Do not be a prisoner of the past, but do not forget it. Build a new kind of empire, one that is not afraid to love." The young prince, the new hope for the dynasty, listens intently. He does not cry. He does not speak. He simply nods. He understands. He's a man who is ready to rule, a man who's ready to take the throne, not just as a king, but as a son who is ready to avenge his mother's honour. And in his quiet resolve, you see a new era dawning, a time of change and a time of reckoning. The love story has been replaced by a dynastic saga, a story of a son who is ready to fight for the legacy of his parents' forbidden love. The years have passed since the young prince's private meeting with his dying father. The emperor has abdicated, passing the throne to his chosen heir, the boy born of his forbidden love. The new emperor, who you now know as the Jacking Emperor, is now in control. He is a man who carries the weight of his father's final words and the memory of a mother he never knew. The Forbidden City, which once felt so cold and empty, is now filled with a different kind of tension, a quiet, simmering energy of anticipation. For you, the silent observer, the most surprising turn of events is about to unfold, the return of the forgotten concubine. The new emperor, in a move that shocks the court, orders a full review of all the court's past records. He's not just looking for a new policy, he's looking for the truth. He is looking for the documents that were sealed away, the lies that were told, the history that was erased. He is a man on a mission, a man who is not just ruling an empire but is also trying to right a terrible wrong. A mainstream historical fact is that the Jiaqing Emperor, upon his ascension to the throne, spent a great deal of time purging the court of his father's old enemies and righting what he saw as injustices. He was a meticulous ruler, a man who was obsessed with order and justice. This was not just a personal quest, it was a political statement, a way of showing the court that a new era had begun and that the old ways of doing things would not be tolerated. Now for a quirky tidbit. During his search, the Emperor found a small, intricately carved wooden box. Inside, he found a collection of poems and letters, all written in a beautiful, elegant hand. They were poems about a homeland far away, about the love for a man, and about the quiet sorrow of a life that was lived in exile. The box was a secret archive, a testament to the life of a woman who was erased from history. He read the poems, and for the first time he understood the depth of his father's love and the tragic beauty of his mother's life. Historians still argue whether the Jiaqing Emperor's decision to bring his mother back was a genuine act of love or a calculated political maneuver to consolidate his power and to show the old court that their power was now gone. Was he a loving son or a shrewd politician? The answer is probably a bit of both. He was a man who genuinely loved the memory of his mother, but he was also a man who was a master of statecraft. Her return would be a powerful symbol of his absolute authority. The order for her return is sent in a sealed decree. It is addressed to the remote, desolate palace in the far north where she's been living in exile for decades. The messenger, a trusted eunuch, is given a simple command: bring her home. You see the old palace, a place of cold, unforgiving solitude. The woman who was once the concubine is now an old woman. Her hair is white, her hands are gnarled. Her eyes, which once had a quiet burning fire, are now filled with a deep abiding sadness. She has been a prisoner for so long that she has forgotten what it is like to be a person. She is a shadow of her former self, a living, breathing ghost. The eunuch, a man who has heard the stories of her, bows low. He does not treat her like a disgraced prisoner. He treats her with the respect and deference of a queen. He presents her with the sealed decree, a command from her son, the emperor, for her return. She reads it, and for the first time in decades, her face shows a flicker of emotion. It is a mix of shock, joy, and a quiet, burning vengeance. She is not forgotten. She is not forgiven. The journey back to the Forbidden City is a long one, but this time it is a journey of triumph, not of shame. She's no longer in a small, simple palanquin. She is in a grand, gilded one, the same one that was once reserved for the Empress. The roads are not rough. The weather is not cold. The journey is a grand procession, a public display of the new Emperor's will. The Empress, now a very old woman, has not seen her rival in decades. She has ruled the court in her own quiet, efficient way, but her victory has been a hollow one. The Emperor is cold to her. The court respects her but does not love her. Her triumph has been her greatest defeat. The two women, two great powers who were once at war, are now about to meet again. One is a woman who has lost her power but has found her son. The other is a woman who has kept her power but has lost everything else. The love story has been replaced by a dynastic drama, and the final act is about to begin. The forgotten concubine is no longer a ghost. She is a woman who has returned, and she is ready to reclaim what was once hers. The Forbidden City holds its breath. The return of the banished concubine, now officially recognised as the Dowager Empress Rong, has been a seismic event, a quiet earthquake that has reshaped the landscape of the court. The old order, the faction that once plotted against her, is now in a state of quiet panic. The young emperor, who you now know as the Jiaqing Emperor, is about to make his final definitive statement. The grand coronation of the son is about to become the ultimate triumph of his parents' forbidden love. You, the silent observer, are now witnessing the culmination of a decades-long struggle. The coronation ceremony is a spectacle of power and tradition, a meticulous dance of ritual and symbolism. The Hall of Supreme Harmony, the same place where the Qianlong Emperor once defiantly displayed his affection for her, is now the stage for her final vindication. The courtiers, the same ones who once whispered behind her back, are now bowing low, their faces a study in practiced deference. The Empress, who once held all the power, is now a frail old woman, watching from the sidelines, a ghost at her own defeat. A mainstream historical fact is that the coronation of a new emperor was a massive days-long event that was steeped in ancient ritual and tradition. It was a symbolic passing of the torch, a way of showing the people that the new emperor's power was not just political, but also divine. By holding this grand ceremony for his coronation, and by giving his mother a place of honour, the Jiaqing emperor was not just becoming a ruler, he was also rewriting history, legitimising his mother's place in the dynasty. Now for a quirky tidbit. During the coronation, the emperor ordered that the royal sedan that would carry his mother to the ceremony would be painted not in the traditional yellow, but in a delicate, almost ethereal shade of lilac, the colour of a rare flower that was native to her homeland. It was a small personal detail that was a nod to his mother's culture, and a subtle but powerful sign to the court that her heritage, once a source of shame, was now a source of honour. Historians still argue whether the Jiaqing emperor's actions were driven by a desire for personal revenge, or a genuine desire to create a more inclusive and just empire. Was he simply trying to punish the people who had wronged his mother, or was he trying to build a new kind of empire, one that was not afraid of diversity and change? The answer is probably a bit of both. He was a man who had a deep personal connection to the memory of his mother, but he was also a man who was a masterful politician. He was using his personal story to create a political narrative. The old empress, who had once been so powerful, now sits in the back of the hall, a forgotten relic of a bygone era. She watches as her rival, the woman she'd tried to erase from history, is now given a place of honour, a place that was once reserved for her. She sees the young emperor, the boy she had tried to take away from his mother, now a strong, confident ruler who is not afraid to defy tradition. She has won the battle, but she has lost the war. Her life, which was so full of power and control, has ended in a state of quiet, dignified defeat. The Dowager Emperor's wrong, the woman who was once the banished concubine, now sits on a low throne, a place of honour beside her son. Her face is a mask of quiet dignity, but her eyes, which have seen so much sorrow, now have a different kind of light, a light of quiet triumph. She's not a woman who is out for revenge. She is a woman who has simply found her place in the world, a woman who has finally found a home. She's a symbol of a great but tragic love story that has finally found its happy ending. The new emperor, as he is crowned, looks at his mother. He does not speak. He does not make a public gesture. He simply looks at her, and in his eyes you see a deep, quiet love, a love that has been nurtured for a lifetime. He is a man who is ready to rule, a man who is ready to take the throne, not just as a king, but as a son who has finally come home. The coronation is over. The crowd disperses. The Forbidden City, which once felt so cold and empty, is now filled with a new kind of energy, an energy of hope, of change, and of love. The love story has been replaced by a dynastic saga, a story of a son who has finally avenged his mother's honour and has created a new kind of empire, one that is built on the foundation of a forbidden love. And you, the silent observer, know that this is not just the end of a story, it is the beginning of a new chapter in history. The grand coronation of the Jiaqing Emperor was not just the triumphant culmination of a love story, it was also the beginning of a new era, one that would be defined by the legacy of that forbidden love. The old order, the faction that had once held so much power, was in disarray. The new emperor, who had avenged his mother and legitimised his own existence, was now in complete control. But you, the silent observer, know that this victory, so hard won, also sowed the seeds of future conflict, a quiet unravelling that would, over a century, lead to the downfall of the dynasty. The first sign of this unravelling was a subtle but profound shift in the court's power dynamics. The empress, who had once been the unshakable rock of the dynasty, was now a powerless figurehead. Her family, once one of the most powerful in the empire, was now a shadow of its former self. A mainstream historical fact is that the Jiaqing Emperor's reign was characterised by a systematic purge of the powerful Hessian clan, a family that had been a major power in the court for decades. Hessian was a powerful official who had been a trusted advisor to the Qianlong Emperor and a vocal ally of the Empress's faction. By orchestrating his downfall, the Jiaqing Emperor was not just punishing a corrupt official, he was dismantling the power base of the old guard, a move that would have been impossible for his father. This was not just a personal revenge, it was a political revolution, a quiet but devastating shift in the balance of power. Now for a quirky tidbit. During his reign, the Jia King Emperor had a strange and seemingly obsessive habit of collecting and preserving the personal effects of his mother. He had her old clothes, her books, and even a small wooden stool that she had sat on in her youth. He would spend hours in a private museum he created for her, looking at these artifacts, touching them, a quiet, almost reverent act of devotion. This was not just an act of love, it was an act of historical preservation, a way of ensuring that his mother's legacy would never be erased again. Historians still argue whether the Jia King Emperor's focus on his personal history and his mother's legacy was a sign of a deep psychological need for vindication, or if it was a political tool to legitimize his rule. Was he a man who was obsessed with the past, or was he a shrewd politician who was using his personal story to create a powerful narrative of a new, more just dynasty? The answer is probably a bit of both. He was a man who had a deep personal connection to the memory of his mother, but he was also a man who was a master of statecraft. The old guard, who had once been so powerful, was now in a state of quiet rebellion. They were not plotting against the emperor, but they were not supporting him either. They were a passive but powerful force of opposition. They saw his actions as a betrayal of their traditions, a dangerous flirtation with foreign ideas and a repudiation of their culture. The unity that had been the hallmark of the Qianlong era was now gone, replaced by a quiet, simmering resentment. The most profound consequence of this affair, however, was not the political unravelling, but the cultural one. The old values, the rigid traditions, the belief in a unified, homogeneous empire were now in question. The Jia King Emperor, by celebrating his mother's foreign heritage, had opened a Pandora's box of cultural change. The empire, which had once been a bastion of tradition, was now a place of new ideas, of foreign influences, of a quiet but powerful desire for change. The emperor, in his later years, would be plagued by a series of rebellions and conflicts, a sign that the unity he had hoped to create was not as strong as he had believed. The dynasty, which had been so powerful for so long, was now showing its first cracks. The love story, which had ended in triumph, had also created a weakness, a quiet but powerful force of opposition that would one day come to haunt his descendants. The reign of the Jia King Emperor would be a turning point in Chinese history, a time of quiet change that would eventually lead to the end of the dynasty. The love story of the Qianlong Emperor and his concubine was not just a personal saga, it was a historical event, a single pebble dropped into the great lake of history that would, over a century, create a series of ripples that would eventually lead to the unravelling of the entire empire. The whispers in the Forbidden City, which had once been about a forbidden love, would now be about a great and powerful dynasty that was slowly but surely beginning to die. The love story had ended, but its legacy was just beginning. The empire was not just a victim of foreign powers or internal strife. It was a victim of a story, a beautiful, tragic story of a love that was so powerful that it could change the course of history. The sun has set on our journey. The golden roofs of the Forbidden City are now a deep velvety black against the twilight sky. The air is cool and still, the whispers of history finally fading into the night. The story of the emperor and his concubine, of a love that was so powerful it could change the course of an empire, is now a part of the past. The echoes of their lives, their love, and their sorrow are now just a gentle hum in the vast, quiet universe. As you close your eyes, let the final images of our story fade into a peaceful darkness. Let the weight of history and the drama of the court be replaced by a sense of quiet calm. The journey is over. The battles have been fought. The love has found its place in the world. There is nothing more to do, nothing more to see. Just the quiet sound of your own breathing and the soft hum of the fan. You are safe. You are at peace. And the secrets of the Forbidden City are now just a quiet, gentle story to ease you into sleep.